All right. Thank you very much again, Sonny, for joining us in the previous episode, which, I think the fact that we had to cut short that episode is emblematic of the problems in our society, including very unreliable infrastructure, unreliable internet, among others. So even mga middle class katulad natin, we're victimized by that. And it's not like you have many options. So I switched from one conglomerate to another conglomerate. Let's just hope the postpaid of one conglomerate works better. Okay, let's do this. I think nabigla ka yata na naghanap ako ng PowerPoint, but don't worry, we can just post your studies and post later. And then we can do properly next time, hopefully, when I'm back in Manila or somewhere else with a better internet. So we can do that separately. But for the purpose of today, so just to recap our discussion kanina, I ask in very simple ways, what is the good, what is the bad, and what is the ugly about the economic track record of the current administration? And we had a little bit of a back and forth about, ontological almost. What is good, right? And why should we even talk about good when there's nothing good? And I think we agreed that wag pilitin kung wala naman talagang good. At the same time, I think for me, it was important to push back against politics or economics of cynicism. And at the same time, also look at really worst case scenarios. I mean, you're looking at Argentina and Turkey running inflation rates 80%, 100%. These are not banana republics per se. I mean, Argentina and Turkey are one of the fastest growing economies, and yet inflation is horrible in those countries, 10 times worse than the Philippines. Philippines is still the fastest growing economy in the region. If I'm not mistaken, one reason we had this talk is because you replied to a post of mine when I said, wow, high growth, low quality, right? Which brings us really to the bad and the ugly part. So when I say good, I was coming from that. And I'm also coming from the fact that we're growing fastest in ASEAN in spite of not having the best governance. Which tells you a lot about the resilience and grittiness. I don't like the word resilience, inabuso ng mga trapo yan. Grittiness and the hard work of our kababayans abroad and in the Philippines, right? So I'm just doing a recap of our previous episode, which for reasons that many will understand in the Philippines was undercut by logistical reasons. But now let's have this conversation, Sonny. So we were saying, if you look at three axes, the Philippines is not doing very well. One is in terms of food inflation, which I think everyone can agree upon, including the surveys, which show that the president's having really downward trajectory. Second one is quality of employment. So it's one thing for you to have an unemployment of, 6-7%, which is not as bad as, 40% in other countries or 20% in other countries. But quality matters. Is this do you have security of tenure? Do you have a certainty that next month or next week, or baka purong contractualization lang yan, diba? And the third axis I was really focused on, which I think will set the tone for really our final episode today, which I think is very important, is productivity growth and manufacturing. So, Sonny, can we go one by one? Kamusta ang food inflation? We are already in the bad and ugly part, obviously. Kamusta ang employment and underemployment, especially quality of employment generation? And third, kamusta ang productivity growths? Let's look at the numbers and resibo, maglabas tayo ng resibo dyan.
Okay. Siguro, first to clarify, it's always nice to have this headline figures like inflation and growth and all of that. But syempre, sometimes what number we're looking at matters. So, halimbawa, dun sa inflation. Of course, tama ka naman. It's better to have lower inflation than faster inflation. Inflation did slow to I think about 5.9 from 5.9% ng October. I'm trying to look at my figures now. 5.3% lamang this year. So slower inflation. But the thing is, there was core inflation. Headline inflation, including mga volatile food and energy products, slowed to 4.9% from 7.7%. So, pero okay yun. But the thing is,
Sonny, wait lang. Can we make a distinction first between headline inflation and core inflation, just for people who are not familiar with it? Because, it depends on which baskets of goods you're looking at before you can even make an assessment about the situation, right? I mean, pwede umakyat yung presyo, ng Toyota Rays or BMW, but that's not as as punchy in the gut as tumaas yung presyo ng bigas or ganun, diba? So there are different ways to measure actually increase in the prices of goods. Kumbaga, inflation. Can we make a quickly distinction between headline inflation and core inflation, just for people also have technical understanding of this?
Sige. Yung headline inflation has that whole basket of goods supposedly representing lahat ng spending ng average Filipino. But because there are two components that tend to be volatile sa kanyang prices, energy prices and food prices, so they have a separate figure called core inflation. So halimbawa, in October, the last data that came out, in October 2023, headline inflation was 4.9%, which is lower than, I think, about 7.7% the previous year. So okay, nag-slow down siya. Pero if you look at core inflation, you take away the food inflation and the energy price inflation, it's actually 5.3% ang core inflation, slower than 5.9% in the previous year. So I think important lang dun is, headline is everything we're spending on, more or less average Filipino. Core inflation, you take away the volatile products, energy, tsaka food.
Right. And in a sense, of course, some of these volatile products are not also our fault. Let's say war in Ukraine, war in the Middle East, it has impact on energy prices. So my konting excuse, I mean konti because we can also talk about oil deregulation, subsidies, etc. But that's why you can look at different measures and still it looks like the picture is not that good, right? So kahit balik-baliktarin natin headline core inflation, it's not really as good as we want. But as I mentioned, it's not as bad as Argentina, Turkey, and other countries, right? Which are even more developed than us in certain sense. Again, just to give perspective, no, so Sonny, I'm not giving an excuse to the administration. I just want to give perspective para hindi tayo sabihin ng purong nega lang mga to. Now let's go to the second part. Employment numbers, underemployment numbers, quality of new jobs being created.
Okay. The thing with stats, diba, it depends on the period you're looking at. If you're comparing the latest figures, which came out for September 2023, if you're comparing September 2023 to September 2022, despite the growth, there was only an 83,000 pesos increase in employment. So 83,000 that's well within the statistical margin of error. It's like statistically insignificant. So if you look at September 2023 from the year before, despite the claim growth, fastest in the region, etc., that's clearly jobless growth. Okay? It gets worse if you compare the monthly employment in September to the previous month in August. Kasi despite the growth, actually had less work in September compared to August. So kung compared to the last year, lumaki ng negligible, statistically insignificant 83,000. If you compare from the previous month, actually we lost 407,000 jobs. So sa amin, despite the growth, we have less work.
Net negative.
So in itself, less siya. It's like 47.7 million lang ang work compared to 48.1 million the month before. So bumaba talaga siya. Ngayon, that's only part of the problem. So that's already part of the problem that there's actually less work compared to the month before, virtually no additional work compared to the year before, but it gets worse. Sorry,
Let's talk about quality. Let's talk about quality of the work also, not only the quantity of jobs available.
If you look at the quality of work naman, even among those employed, by our last estimate, if you count people who are creating work, hindi siya sahuran eh. Actually, about 45% of work in the Philippines is not sahuran. It's domestic work, it's self-employment, it's working in family farms, family businesses, basically informal sector, yung mga dumidiskarte lamang. So, anong problema dyan? If you have about roughly 48 million Filipinos working, yung nasa informal work is over 20 million. Informal work, it's irregular work, ang baba ng kita mo, you work a few hours lamang, you're earning like really, super low pay yan. So that's problematic sa quality of work. Second thing, even among those sa sahuran, did you know, out of roughly, the government claims na by the figures, it's about 24 million salaried workers in the private sector. Out of those, about
medyo regular sila, meaning medyo may regularity. There's like 13-month pay, I don't know, some sort of healthcare, etc. Just
no, ayun nga eh. Yun ang point ko eh.
It gets
by the labor force as sahuran sila, but yung nasa formal establishments na you have to assume may ganyang klaseng regular pay, may kontrata, verbal or written, it's only about 10 million.
Sobrang liit,
Actually,
diba?
about a little bit over 9 million lamang.
Right. So,
Nandun. So
less than
even doon sa mga
10% of
sahuran,
the
the
population.
majority, yes, tumatanggap sila ng sahod but without all the protections ng labor code. And that's also, even among that roughly 10 million na nasa formal establishments, I mean, the DOLE has about, I think, 500 labor inspectors. They can visit, I think, randomly lang doon sa all the establishments, maybe like 6,000 establishments a year. So you also have to, you can't assume then na even those in regular establishments get all their benefits, get all the protections the labor code produces. So sa akin, that's so important kasi we have a super informal economy. And I think that's part yung advocacy mo. A non-industrialized economy is never going to be a formal economy. So you don't have the formal processes involved in that and all the whole infrastructure for that. So sa akin, bottom line, in terms of the jobs we're not generating, in terms of jobs we're actually losing, may problem. But even the jobs that are there, they're such poor quality jobs.
It's gig
and
economy. It's gig economy, right? I mean, I don't know. It's you know, like the posh version is vlogging, like what we're doing, right? There's no regularization, there's no contract. Parang kumaga yun yung konyong version vlogging, right? But for marami sa ating kababayan, mayroon silang trabaho, but you know, the quality of the work, it's there's no certainty, there's no security of tenure, there's no benefits, nothing. And this is a condition for vast majority of Filipino people in the workforce, which tells you a lot about how backward the Philippines is in terms of quality growth generation. But Sonny, you also mentioned methodological mumbo jumbos that you can do in terms of counting, right? Like, paano mo masabi na isang tao may trabaho, diba? Sonny Africa. You can also play a game around that, right? The number of hours, the regularity, you can play that to push up the numbers of employment. So don't take statistics on the face value. Look at the methodology and how they measure employment, for instance.
Okay. Actually, super good question yan. Since April 2005, it's been a big pet peeve of ours sa IBON Kasi the government changed their definition of who counts as unemployed.
Arroyo administration to, naalala ko to.
Yeah, di ba ang tagal na nun? Actually, even si President Aquino complained about that Pero nung presidente na siya, hindi niya pinindigan. But anyway, ang problema, since there was a shift in methodology na basically it's not enough to not have a job to be counted as unemployed. Kailangan you don't have a job plus you're looking for work in the last 6 months plus at a drop of a hat in the next 2 weeks pwede ka pumasok. So that sounds innocent. But the thing is, when they put those two qualifications in, had to have looked for work in the last 6 months, should be able to immediately enter work. Even in 2005, about 2.5 to 3 million jobless Filipinos weren't officially counted as unemployed. And that's still happening today.
So, Sonny, let me put it this way. Hindi lang mahirap maghanap ng trabaho sa Pilipinas, mahirap din ma-qualify as unemployed sa Pilipinas. You know, like we're kind of like...
Mahirap mabilang na unemployed ka. So, yeah, exactly. Even you talk about mag-unemployment benefits tayo. Oh my God! Ng gobyerno, hindi ka ma-unemployed At hindi to, I'm not a facetious comment. Kinumplain niya ng IBON in April 2005. Oh my God, I've been here for so long. Anyway, kinumplain namin April 2005. A couple of weeks later, then NSCB came out with a blog saying, tama lang na people like that who haven't been looking for work shouldn't be counted as unemployed kasi tamad sila. So screenshot ko yan. And that's, I think, that's glaring. May problema talaga doon.
Gaslighting. Alam ko may isang admin dyan na napakagaling sa ganyan. Gaslighting, victim blaming.
Yeah. So yun, sa amin, that matters so much because it also explains kung bakit, despite the decrease in working Filipinos in September from the month before, that also explains kung bakit the unemployment figure actually fell to 4.4%. So sa amin, again, you know, sabi nga nila statistics.
Medyo mambo-jumbo yan, no? But before we go to the number 3, which is really my pet peeve, which is productivity manufacturing, let's talk about the first one because may version din tayo ng victim blaming like, ay, tumaas ang presyo ng bigas. Walang problema. Bawasan natin ng rice. Healthy lifestyle tayo. Yung mga ganyan. Yung mga ganyan comments, di ba? Yung mga ganyan comments. So, my goodness. I mean, just the deracinated nature of some of the people in government sometimes, the comments they make, it's just mind-boggling. Hindi nga kayo magaling na technocrat, gaslighter pa kayo victim blaming. Like, oh, I mean, I agree. I cut my rice, di ba? I cut my rice, but you have to have steak. You have to have meat. You have to have healthy alternatives to carbohydrates. But how can you afford that? Mas mahal pa sa bigas yung, you know what I'm saying? Like, just the insensitivity of it. These people don't seem to know anything. I don't think they eat grocery like you and I, right? Like, forget about palengke. So, yun lang, bro. I mean, like, just the two, we already see gaslighting as one of their ways out. But let's go perhaps to the most important one, productivity growth, manufacturing, because the manufacturing imperative, as Danny Roderick put it, who's, by the way, Turkish-American economist, right? So let's talk about this. Kamusta ang productivity growth in manufacturing sector and agricultural sector, which my co-columnist Chelito Abito also always talks about in his column in the Philippine Daily Core, and of course, former NEDA chief. Nagtrabaho ka ba kay Chelito? Kanina ka nagtrabaho sa NEDA nun?
At that time,
Parang ayaw mo na
padalaga.
sabihin na. Parang ayaw mo na sabihin.
Kasi I left NEDA because hindi ko gusto yung takbo sa NEDA. I mean, I still have friends in NEDA, but na-disillusion talaga ako. I mean, I came from university, you want to development work, where do you go? NEDA.
Right.
But after 11 months, sabi ko, oh my God, dead end to. So,
malabo to. But again, for fairness, people can check on our podcast, my interview with Arsenio Balisacan, Dr. Balisacan, of course, to get the other side of the things. Fair naman ako, I interview all sides.
Poverty guru.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, ka-Ilocano ko yan, kaya bias kami. I'm kidding.
Speaking up now.
Yeah. Sonny, let's talk about this. Number 3, productivity. Kamusta naman ang productivity?
Ay, teka. Sorry.
Please.
Pero, sorry, magto 2.5 lang ako. I think it's so important to look at the unemployment figures and to look at the quality of work kasi that explains why there are more Filipinos declaring themselves as poor now compared to a year ago. And that's so important eh. You can't talk about growth, you can't talk about foreign investment, you can't talk about investor interest if there are 1 million more poor Filipino families compared to, say, the middle of 2022. From 12.2 million, according to SWS, nag 13.2 million na yan. And that matters kasi para saan pa yung growth, diba? Para saan pa yung investment? Para saan pa yung pinagmamalaki na all the competitiveness? So sort of wanna add that kasi that fills in that's the last bit of the puzzle of why people are suffering right now because they don't have jobs. Pero kung sa productivity, okay, so totoo lang, productivity has been increasing sa manufacturing.
Yes, I saw that. Kaya nga I wanted to get your,
but the thing
your
is,
understanding.
the way productivity is the way productivity is measured, value added over employment. Now the thing is, did you know nabawasan ng employment in manufacturing? So parang
you can mathematically
lots of signs of the industry.
Right? Kasi the denominator kung less.
Yeah, ganun pa simple lang.
Yeah, exactly.
Diba?
You bring that one down, tataas yung isa. Yeah, exactly.
So compared to a year before, there's almost 900,000 less jobs in manufacturing. So of course, productivity is going to increase. Ganun din. From the month before, nag-decline din siya. So actually, productivity is not the right thing to look at if you want to look at industrialization. It's the size of the manufacturing sector. And I think, yung reaction ko dun sa ano mo, nega talaga ako eh. Nag-react ako dun sa tweet mo kasi it was so surprising and I double-checked to make sure tama sabihin ko eh. Manufacturing in the third quarter is down to 15.4% of the economy, which is the lowest since the 1940s.
Grabe.
So pre-Filipino first, it's been declining since more or less about the late 1970s. That's awful talaga. And sa amin, that's what matters because we don't have a healthy manufacturing sector with all the upstream, downstream linkages, with all the assumptions, so the intrinsic improvements in technology, in terms of the capacity of managing that kind of economy, the formality of having all the interlinkages from the raw materials all the way down to the putting it together and then selling it, maybe even going abroad. You will always have an informal economy. There's no other way to have a formal economy than through a healthy, grounded industrial process. But the thing is, ito yung nakakainis sa amin. Trivia na lang sa'yo. Trivia lang, di ba? Did you know that's actually more than the medium and high technology exports of South Korea? In South Korea, mga 35% lamang ang medium and high technology exports nila. Even the US, about 25-30% lamang.
I like the comparative.
So, according to a certain metric, if you look at Philippine exports, parang wow, we're a high technology exporting superpower. The problem is, it's not Filipino. They come from export processing zones. They come from the technology manufacturers based in export processing zones.
That's
And they're
mali
not
yung added
actually even
value.
technology intensive. It's mainly
Yeah.
there's a bit of testing, a
Yeah.
bit of assembly. And hindi ko makalimutan 80 to 90% of the inputs of all these technology exports actually imported. So literally, our value added is we're like putting it together,
Sobrang
putting it into
liit lang.
boxes if it's final
Exactly.
product. Yeah. And I think that matters so much kasi statistics can deceive And one of the most deceiving things about statistics now, even the size of the manufacturing sector, one, it doesn't reflect your industrial base. In US, halimbawa, after like 4 decades of globalization, the US spread out their industrial base globally. Like
Right.
Apple, di ba? Apple high tech, but wala man manufacturing plants sa US. It's in China, it's in Taiwan. So the thing is, if you look at the US industrial statistics, parang de-industrialized sila. But it's only half the story. It just says they're not in the US because they have their super long supply chain spread out across the world. Pero may flip side din yon. It also means, like in the country like the Philippines,
Right.
the
You also
manufacturing
the
that
other side. Yeah.
investments in our economic zones, where well, not all, about 70% of our manufacturing is, they're foreign. So they're TNCs.
Yeah.
So nabo-bloat actually yung manufacturing figures natin. Small as it is, it's actually bloated by non-Filipino manufacturers. And the thing is, that's so important to grasp kasi problematic na nga na limited manufacturing sector natin in general. Even more problematic, about 60-70% of our manufacturing sector is not even Filipino. It's like disconnected from the rest of the
I mean,
economy.
Sonny, you
And
can
it's like two
easily see
layer,
that.
parang one share.
Yeah. It's Sonny Africa. I mean, you can easily see that in the import numbers. Ang laki ng import natin ng mga semiconductors, intermediate goods, and then malaki rin export na konting mas malaki. So you can easily see in the numbers na konti lang inad natin dun sa in-import natin. So you have to look at the entire, trade linkages flow, no? But again, Sonny, I think we're already anticipating the next episode on industrial policy. But I want to keep it
Okay,
here,
sorry, yeah.
Sonny. No, if I could add a fourth element, which is the favorite of performative commercial diplomacy, yung foreign direct investment pledges, right? So supposedly $80 billion of FDI pledges ang nakuha ng ating Pangulo in his first 8 months, 10 months in office. But actually FDI went down, right? Over the past year. I mean, some of the numbers are crazy, close to 30% drop, depending on which quarters you're looking at and which period. So even on the FDI front, things are not looking good because the investors, hindi sila mapapadala sa magandang speech lang. Hindi sila ma-convince na porket hindi na si Digong presidente maganda ng Pilipinas. Nagre-research po sila, hindi sila nadadala sa mga gandang usapan lang, di ba? Performative, posh diplomacy. You need to do more than just going to the World Economic Forum. Mukhang makuli. You wanna say something?
Pwede mag-comment dyan, Richard. Super itching kasi we hate that FDI metric I mean, we can benefit from FDI. But just because there's FDI doesn't mean we're benefiting. Trivia na lang, uli. Did you know, measured as a share of GDP, yung foreign direct investment in the Philippine economy right now is about 23 or 24%, equivalent to 23 to 24% of GDP. And that's a huge increase over the last 4 decades. Did you know, yung period na economic takeoff ng South Korea, Taiwan, and China, FDI as a share of GDP sa kanila was 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%.
Yeah,
Even yung South Korea and
technology
Taiwan by the
transfer.
80s.
Yeah, it was more tech transfer.
Exactly. So sa
than
amin,
FDI driven. Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah.
or tech stealing. Di ba? Or like,
Oh yeah,
through
tech espionage. Yeah,
intellectual
corporate
piracy.
espionage. Yeah.
Yeah, ang bait mo transfer, para ano yan, enforced transfer.
Yeah.
But sa akin, that's so important kasi even ako, I have a hard time complaining about less investment kasi it's not about less investment is better, less investment more. It's about ano nakuha natin with what investments there, whether malaki or hindi. And super good example sa amin, how South Korea, Taiwan, China, sa totoo lang, the last great industrializers in the last 30, 40 years, they had such a small reliance on FDI, they focused on building domestic capacity. Sa akin, unless our economic managers, unless the public gets over this obsession with FDI as a metric of success, we're not going to treat FDI the way it should be treated, which is contributing to the national economy, not just giving to them. Last point na lang, kasi insalaga ako sa kanila Intel, di ba? Intel was in the Philippines for about 35 years. Their
Right.
second overseas plant was in the Philippines after Malaysia. At its height, $1.5 billion in investments in the Philippines, the biggest foreign investor at the time, exporting at their peak about almost $6 billion worth of semiconductor exports. When they packed up in 2009, what semblance or what shadow of semiconductor capacity did we have? Nothing. So alam mo yun, for decades, it had all the nice figures, the investment coming in, the exports going out, even the jobs being created, parang 3 or 4 thousand jobs sila. But when they left nothing behind. E sa akin, that's so important na may lesson na tayo eh. So,
Yeah,
sorry,
I think Sonny,
I'm rambling.
right. No, no, no. This, kaya nga parang, ano lang, I know you're excited, but let's keep it for a different episode. In fact, there's a term for that by Yoshihara Konyo, the Japanese economist. He called it technology-less industrialization because you're over-relying on FDI and just, assembling what's coming out. We can discuss that. So I'm keeping the ammunition dry for that. Now, let me go to...
Sorry.
No, it's okay. So I think this episode is essentially the economic track record under Marcos. So let's have a short episode on what's wrong with the what is the role of technocrats in the Philippines? Because we usually let them scot-free. So I want to have a discussion on that because I think that will perfectly set the tone for the discussion on what should be an industrial policy strategy for the Philippines. Maraming salamat, Sonny. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.